During the past few weeks, Ms. has given several reasons for denying this AJC ad, among them that Israel doesn't deserve a celebratory ad because of its feminist record and that it would set off a firestorm. Please call for an analysis. Israel's feminist record. In truth, the record is not yet perfect and there's plenty of work to be done. And to give credit where credit is due, many Israeli feminists learn their agenda from Ms. and from other American feminist institutions that set the bar high for all of us, for women everywhere. But it is also true that Israel is light years ahead of most, if not all, Middle Eastern countries when it comes to the status of women, and even in some areas ahead of the United States. The record unequivocally shows that Israel has made continuous strides towards gender equality, both through civil court decision and government legislation, and these three women in high positions are an obvious symbol of that fact. Ms. has a history of celebrating gains, so its denial here is quite painful to Jewish Zionist feminists. 2, that the ad would create a firestorm, and this is really what is at the heart of Mrs. contemptible action. It means that the forces at Ms. that decide matters have aligned themselves with a political far left whose agenda is to totally delegitimate Israel on the stage of world opinion. That cohort wants Israel to be seen as a rogue state having no right to exist, so it must suppress any good news about Israel, such as three talented women in high office, for that picture goes against the stormtrooper image that the far left has tried to portray of Israel. The most frightening aspect of such hostile attitudes is that they become cannon fodder and incitement for those who harbor genocidal plans for Israel, as does Ahmadinejad of Iran. And that a sophisticated political left does not connect those dots is a sign of blinding hatred for Israel. This hatred of the far left is a very real phenomenon. It is hypocritical and morally repulsive to facilitate would-be genocide under the cover of resisting oppression. And it is quite sad that some in the secular feminist movement have bought into this whole ideology. Ms. would be guilty of being an accessory if it continues to be silent and suppress the truth about Israel for fear of firestorm from its allies. The second meaning to firestorm is that the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel faction, and I want to stress that these two do not always go together, has such well-oiled machinery that even mighty Ms. is afraid of the firestorm of this faction. Aside from its own gaping lack of self-criticism, this faction tries to quash or twist the truth about Israel. It cries foul anytime anyone says something affirming Israel, and it also makes up its own libelous stories that are hard to catch up with afterwards. I know that this unrelenting pressure can be intimidating, and one has to have a strong spine not to buckle. Even the world press in the Middle East, which knows that its reporters will lose access to the Palestinian community if it writes too much positive truth about Israel, often caves in. But one would have hoped that Ms., known for its independence and for standing up to so many of the firestorms that it created, would have stood up to this one. Are Jews making a mountain out of a molehill? Is this some right-wing paranoid cabal looking for trouble? I wish I could believe that were the case, but I have seen too much of it in secular feminist circles to know that it is a strong undercurrent in significant parts of that community. Mrs. action here should serve as an alert to Jewish women and men, a signal to us that we cannot sweep such actions under the rug or put our heads in the sand, but must speak out and hold accountable those who try to demonize or delegitimate Israel. I'm not suggesting that we shut down or disallow all criticism of Israel. No nation is a saint, and certainly not a nation under siege. Israel has made many political mistakes, some in part because she has been under siege since day one of a Jewish state created in a part of the world where the other is not welcome. Israel needs continuous correction and critique, and I can identify with many aspects of the liberal left on that score. Israel's own freedom of the press is a model of self-criticism, and not just in that part of the world. But like its record on feminism, Israel has made incredible achievements in building a liberal democratic state. This story must also be told, especially to counter the rogue state image that Ms. would refrain from correcting for some of its readers. Equally important to counter the rogue state image is this fundamental truth. Israel has exercised the most incredible restraint in the face of the most extreme provocation of any country imaginable on a daily basis, year in and year out. Without all of those young soldiers protecting the country, Israel would have been pushed into the sea long ago. So this is a battle, not only for the legitimacy and truth about Israel in world opinion, but also a struggle for the very soul of feminism. Coercion, silence, manipulation, these are the enemies of feminism. Ms., long held as a standard of truth and fairness, must not succumb to them. We have all learned a lesson from this incident. Perhaps feminists can go forward and work together to restore not only the rightful image, but also the integrity and power of feminism.